This is Otterton Mill in Devon, and in here is one of the earliest industrial processes. This water turns this wheel, which turns this thing here, which turns a big millstone in there, to turn this into one of these. Everybody needed bread, so there used to be thousands of mills all over the country. This is Documentaries. It's a couple of miles from Otterton. There used to be a mill here, but it was knocked down in the 1960s. The first record of a mill on this site, though, is in Domesday in 1086. We've never dug a mill before, so this site gives us a unique opportunity to look into part of what would have been everyday life for tens of thousands of people. We've got 900 years of history and just 3 days to untangle it. What is it that you find so exciting about mills?
I think they're really interesting structures and we don't know much about them. After all, there must have been many thousands of them in medieval England. And almost every community would have had one because it made grinding the corn, preparing the bread and everything that much easier. And yet we've done very, very little work on them.
Why not, if they're that exciting?
I think it's because of the way archaeologists work. You know, they're either working with sites that are going to be redeveloped, and they don't often seem to involve mills, or they're too small, really, to be part of big research projects that might get the money which archaeologists then spend 3 or 4 years digging. So they fall between all those stools. And that's why this is so important. It's not very often you can be fairly confident you've got a site and you've got the chance to actually do anything with it. I mean, I think the way to think of it is you are grinding corn by hand with stones. This is pretty well the first process where you harness a different sort of energy, i.e. water power, to alleviate all that work. So it's an industrial revolution in one sense.
This was the last mill building in Otterton. It was knocked down in the 1960s. We're looking for a date for when this building was put up and any sign of anything that may have come before it. There was a mill listed as being in Otterton in Domesday in 1086. But the big question is, has the mill always been in the same place? There are 3 main areas that hopefully will provide some answers in the form of dates. The water wheel would have sat in a deep pit. We'll look at how that was built. Inside was a gear pit to hold the gearing. We'll also try to find that. And there would have been a domestic area, the part the miller would have lived in. Hopefully we'll come across bits of pottery and household stuff that'll also help us with the dating. The mill sits here, on a road crossing the River Otter in South Devon.
Right, photo, bank. Bank's over there, bank's there.
But first, Phil has got to work out where to dig.
Shall we help you a bit?
No, well, no. Look, presumably we're on a wheel pit, don't we?
Yeah, wheel pit there, but this photograph was taken from that field over there, looking this
that way.
Yeah.
Ah!
That, you got it? So this building has actually been mapped for 100 and odd years. Its physical presence is well documented. And where we're standing at the moment is just here. This is the mill. The mill was in this area here, coming down here, and at the bottom of it is the wheel somewhere in this position at the end of this leak that comes down here.
That's what we want, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, the wheel pit. I think the wheel pit would be the best feature to go for straight away because it'll be a big feature under the ground and will delineate the sort of at the end of the building.
Well, I mean, it's on the
That's
map.
where we should start doing the radar.
Start the radar here, yeah,
Look,
and
we
spread out from
we
here.
don't need it.
No, you do. You may have good map evidence. We all know what Stuart's maps are like. But no, more importantly, Phil, It's the first time we've done a mill. We've not done geophysics or radar over a mill. It's important that we collect that data as a future reference.
John, we're not here for your groundbreaking geophysics. We're here to do a site.
It's the way it should be done professionally.
Look, we know where it is.
It will take us 5 minutes to do it.
I've heard that before.
Over here, Stuart.
Yeah, start here, Jimmy.
True to his word, within minutes, John's got something for Phil to look at.
That's where we reckon the wheel pit is. Then you see all these reflections going down. Those are actually within the mill building. And this is still inside the building, but suggesting we've got internal divisions. So you can start. I mean, that's been worth doing it.
Oh, yeah, well, that's it. And it didn't take any more than 5 minutes.
Happy now, Phil makes a start.
One more scrape and you think you might see a wall. But nothing happens.
Yeah,
You think, oh,
keep
well,
going.
one more scrape and there might be a wall.
Dirty, though, isn't it?
It is getting dirtier.
Well, one more scrape later.
Ah, no, what's that?
That's bricks. That's in situ, isn't it, Phil?
That is in situ.
That's in
Oh,
situ.
that's good. Look at that.
Yeah.
Nice load of bricks, yeah. Going straight down there, look.
Right.
So that's one side there.
This is Otterton. Here's the River Otter. This is the road that crosses the river. And the mill, where Phil is here. Just here, water's diverted from the river to the mill along a channel called a leat. The leat enabled the miller to control the flow of water to the mill. In the field across the road from the mill site, we can see remnants of where the leat might be along the base of the slope. How big was it? How powerful? And can we find a date for when it was dug? Helen opens a trench across it. The mill building is really two buildings in one. There's the industrial part of it, where the machinery would have been, and then there's the domestic side, where the miller lived. Using radar, John and his team have been trying to locate that end of the building. They think they've found it. So we open a trench just across here. Naomi's hoping to find more personal stuff here. Pottery and domestic material, which will give us some dates. All morning, we've been busy looking for the wheel pit. But what might it have looked like?
What a cracking little graphic. I mean, presumably this is actually telling me how my water wheel works.
It is, Phil.
There's 4 different types. I mean, how do they differ in terms of design and efficiency?
Well, it's all about where the water's hitting the paddles. So with the overshot and the breast shot, the water's hitting the paddles high up the wheel. With the undershot and the low breast shot, it's lower down. The one we've got is an undershot wheel.
How does that work in terms of efficiency?
It's the least efficient of the wheels we've got here.
Typical.
Sorry,
I get a duff mill, don't I? Yes.
Well, not really. This is an older type of technology for a water wheel.
I noticed that here you've got this sort of little mini weir effect right underneath the wheel.
Yeah, it's actually in the wheel pit itself, and what that is doing is it's creating a little dam of water which gives you an added power to the water wheel.
So as the water's coming down the leat, it just gets to that edge and it tips over and it spins up the wheel.
So although it's inefficient, it's not as inefficient as it might be.
What are you doing?
Just like... What I'm doing is cutting the grass, to be plainly obvious.
He's stalled.
I didn't switch it off.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, what we've got here, Tony, you see on this slope down here?
Yeah.
There are what called parch marks. You can see these light coloured lines on the slope.
Yeah.
Well, these parch marks are where there might be buried walls under the ground. It's slightly drier because they're stone, so they start to stand out. But this area's got longer grass in it, so I'm just simply cutting it so we can see it better. And the idea is that Henry is going to map this out with his pole, and we might have a footprint of some buildings here.
So this is going to be useful.
Oh, it is going to be. It's good fun as well.
I'm going to go off elsewhere, see how long it takes before it can get that engine started again.
Ye of little faith.
This is where Stuart's cutting the grass, just off to one side of the mill site. The leat is here. The parch marks seem to be across all of this area. We leave him to it. Mills were really a very early device for saving labour. Harnessing water power was a huge step forward, as I was to discover. Prior to the water wheel, this is how grinding corn was done. By hand. Some weight to move about, isn't it?
It's fairly hard work, and to think from the records that we have, most of the time it was done by women.
How much do you think's there?
There's a couple of pounds of wheat there, that's going to make a nice little loaf.
And how long would it take to grind it?
At that speed, about an hour.
It's one of those jobs that actually isn't too bad when you start, but after you've been doing a few minutes, it really pulls in your back. And that hurts quite a bit there. I'm sort of a funny angle, really. Matt, could you give me a hand? Could you just hold that for... Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
sure.
Excellent. Yeah, OK.
The corn in there.
Keep going.
About half an hour, Matt.
Wait, look at that.
In Phil's trench, we're coming across lots of bricks. And there's also a lot of metalwork that Phil doesn't recognise.
Martin, we've got another of these pieces. What
Well,
are
that's
they?
good, Phil. That's some reinforcing, I think, from the water wheel, where one of the arms, one of the spokes, joined the rim of the wheel, and it was all bolted together.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've actually got the wood preserved, sort of just stuck against the iron there, and right the way through here. This is
Yeah.
all just wood as well. We're getting so many of these, but the other thing we're getting are these things here. What are they?
Well, again, that looks like a reinforcing plate. You see, it's got a curve to it,
Yeah, we've been looking at that.
which I should think is the outside diameter of the water wheel, and is holding together the wooden rims that come round to make a ring, a continuous ring, and this is where they're joined together. They're bolted together with these iron plates.
So we have actually got the water wheel.
We've got some very good bits of the water wheel, perhaps more than you would expect to survive. We got a lot of the ironwork that held it together, and we could get the size of some of the components from these as well.
The pieces in Phil's trench give us an indication of the size of the wheel. They fit together like this. It's a big wheel, about 3 metres across, probably dating from the Victorian period. Earlier on today, Helen put in a little trench over here to see if she could find the leat, which is the stream that they use for driving the water wheel. How'd you get on?
Oh, well, we've done brilliantly. We've got almost all of it. Let me show you.
What was it like digging this stuff?
Not bad. It's generally soft with a few hard lumps, but the particularly easy bit was when Ian was digging it with the mechanical digger, I'm afraid. This is the clearest bit. This is the lenses of little layers, puff pastry layers of grey and yellow, which have come from where the water was. This is the actual leat here. And then along here, again, incredibly obvious, these red stones are kind of stone lining to the leat itself. So we've got the whole of this side. The only thing we haven't got is the other side. It should be exactly the same on the other side, but it's underneath that great hill.
So do we know what date this wall is?
Well, if it's a stone wall, Mick, I think that means it's going to be before the 18th century, late medieval, 16th, 17th
Really?
century.
As early as that?
Yeah, well, the reason is if it was 18th or 19th century, it would be a nicely dressed stone wall, or it more likely would be a brick wall, and it's not.
And you think it's late medieval?
Late medieval? Yeah.
Helen, this is you. Late medieval.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's exactly what we wanted.
End of day one and we're halfway to doomsday. The leat looked like this. It was quite shallow and wide, about 2 metres across. It had 2 edges made of stone. These edges place it in the medieval period. We've got the leat. The work of this trench is now done. So we can now say it goes across here to Phil's trench, where it should join the wheel pit, if we have that. Phil, you got anything in your trench?
Of course I have. Got the wheel pit. This is the wheel pit. a lot of that's actually filled in, but we have got to the bottom of the wheel pit. And look at this. This brick wall is actually made out of recent bricks. They're frogged. Look, there's the imprint of the frogs.
Yeah.
But what we have got is the pivot point for the wheel. So the actual wheel would have pivoted on that point there. I mean, that is really good because it'll give us an opportunity to reconstruct just how big this thing was.
So this whole thing here, that is all the wheel pit?
That is the wheel pit.
It's a hell of a size wheel, isn't it?
Well, that's right. But you see, what we want to do is if we can get over there,
yeah,
that wall is a totally different build to this. I reckon that wall's a lot earlier. What we've got to do is get over there and have a look at it.
Go on then.
Just in front of you there, Henry, there's a parch mark there.
With the grass now shorter, Stuart's got a better view of the parch marks. He and Henry plot them out. And it's beginning to make interesting viewing. A rather good day, I think. We've got the mill over there, we've got the leat over there.
Yeah, and we've got some intriguing parch marks over here.
Are those parch marks working out all right for you?
Well, they are, because they seem to match up with an 1842 tithe map that we've got that shows buildings on this slope over here. So they're sitting above the leat here. So, yeah, I think we've got buildings on there.
And the geophysics gives us a really good plan of those buildings.
Why are we getting excited about another building? We've already got the mill over there.
Well, we've got a building shown here on the map that makes use of the slope of the ground, the natural slope of the ground, and comes down to the mill stream. So are we looking at another mill?
Another mill?
Well, in my experience, it's quite usual to have the crossing point on the downstream side of the mill, which would fit the bill very nicely in this case.
So we came for one mill. Maybe we've got two. Who knows? Maybe we'll even get three.
Well, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
But we won't know till tomorrow.
No.
History Hit is an award-winning streaming platform built by history fans for history fans. Enjoy our rich library of documentaries covering key events and locations of the medieval period. History Hit's medieval offering features leading historians such as Dan Jones, Eleanor Janega and Kat Jarman. Not only that, but we've a rich library of audio documentaries covering every period of history through our network of podcasts. Sign up now for a free trial, and Chronicle fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Chronicle at checkout.
Beginning of day 2 here at Otterton in East Devon. We had a good day yesterday,
It was
didn't we?
good, wasn't it? We got a long way with it.
We found the most recent phase of the mill over there, and Phil and Naomi are going to continue digging that. But yesterday evening, you started to develop this theory that there might be another mill up here on this slope somewhere.
Yeah.
What's the evidence for that?
Well, there is a building shown on the tithe map anyway in 1842.
Yeah.
But you see there are lots of parch marks in the grass.
Yeah.
Where the grass has died over the top of probably walls underneath. And so we did some geophysics across here, and clearly there is something going on.
All right, there might be buildings there, but it doesn't mean it's a mill.
Well, it's an odd place to put a house or farm buildings. You imagine it'd be just stepped all the way up this slope. It'd be very inconvenient.
So why would it be a good place to put a mill?
Well, let me show you on a diagram, look. We've got the leat at the bottom of the slope. We've then got the rise up of the ground. And if you build a mill across that slope like that, there are certain advantages. You can have the mill wheel in the pit like that and driving the mill machinery, but you can actually bring the corn in at the top level, straight into the top of the building.
But it is still only a theory.
Yeah, it needs testing.
How do we test it?
I think what we do is we dig a trench from where the leat is at the bottom of this slope up into the crop marks where the geophysics depict stuff. If we find a wheel pit down there, we'll know we're right and there was a mill. But if it goes straight into buildings, we'll know that it was a bad idea and there wasn't a mill here. So it should be quite easy to test.
This new trench is just here, across the leat and on the edge of a building that shows up both in the parch marks and on a 19th century map. If we find a wheel pit, we've got another mill. If so, the chances are it will be earlier than the one in Phil's trench. On the main side, we've got 2 trenches going. In the domestic area, we've got several internal walls. At one end, we're going deeper down the outside of the building. At the other end of the building, Phil's also getting a lot deeper. This photograph of the mill is helping us make sense of the archaeology.
We are standing about here, but at a higher level.
Right.
And you see, if you look across here, here's the axle of the main wheel, and you can see that that is at ground level, which would actually slot into that sort of indentation in the brickwork.
Yeah.
Now, if you carry that across, then that goes into that wall there, which is going to be our wall across there.
That's behind the planks on the left-hand side there.
That's right. If you compare the level at which this wheel axle goes across and the level of the windows, which are right up here.
So these are right up across here, then,
That's
the windows,
right.
aren't they?
So in other words, that does suggest that your floor level is going to have to be down here, which suggests that underneath here, just as was picked up on the geophysics, there is actually an underground room, if you like, where the mill equipment would have been, which is going to be underneath there.
Yeah. So does that sound feasible to you, Mike?
Yeah, I think that's very good, Mick. But what I think we need to do first is we need to get into the wheel pit and pull it back further towards the road.
Why do we need to do that?
Well, I think what we should be looking for in the wheel pit is a little rise, a little kick up at the back of the bottom of the wheel pit.
What do you mean?
Well, we're looking for a mini dam, perhaps a foot, 2 feet high, which would increase the headwater and efficiency of the water wheel.
So that as the water comes in, it's a little bit higher than the bottom of the wheel, in fact.
Now, if we can find that, that'll give us not only what kind of wheel we've got in detail, but also I think it'll help us a bit about the date.
So what date would that sort of structure indicate?
Well, it oughtn't to be any earlier than the 16th century.
Right.
Just a couple of miles away is Otterton Mill. It's still a working mill, grinding corn once a week. It's interesting. It shows me just how much this process changed people's lives. Martin said he reckoned it would take us about half an hour to grind this little lot up by hand. In fact, Matt did it and it took him 2 hours.
Oh dear.
How long do you reckon it would have taken at a watermill?
A couple of minutes in a mill like this.
How does it work, Martin?
Well, the water wheel's mounted on a central shaft or axle which goes through the wall into the mill, and that takes the power right through into the part where you need it to drive the millstone.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can see the shaft coming through there.
Yes, that's right, Tony, and the main gear turning in a pit at the bottom, and that's the feature that we're looking for in the mill at Docton.
So the gear going that way then transfers into this one and the power goes up there?
That's right, and this is driving the millstones which are on the floor above.
So the power comes up through to here?
Yes, it does. It's turning the top millstone, that's turned from below, and then you can see the hopper over the millstones where the grain is being fed by gravity down into a hole through the top millstone.
And what happens to the corn once it's ground?
Well, it comes out inside the case, and then there's only one place for it to go, and that's down the spout to the floor below.
So we have to go back down again?
We do indeed, yeah.
You keep fitting a mill. Oh, and here's the finished product coming down the chute.
Yep.
How long do you think it would take to fill up that sack?
Apparently it takes about a quarter of an hour.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Back on site, our search for what might be an earlier mill isn't going well. Helen and Bridge have found very little, really. There are some pieces of pot, but it all looks like a rubbish dump to them. Even that, though, isn't simple.
It'd be nice to know if we're looking at an area where there is possibly earlier material floating about, rather than this being the early features.
Yeah, I'd like to know if this is a primary rubbish dump or somebody's just clearing another rubbish dump in a secondary way into something else.
If there is an earlier mill in this field, it has to be against the edge of the leat. So we geophys along the leat to see if we can pick up any structures, just to check it out. In his trench, Phil's got another wall.
Is that it?
I think it might be, Phil.
Oh, look!
Good. Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Stone of crows.
That's following the shape of the water wheel.
Oh,
We've done it.
yeah, there's a wall, there's a great wall there.
It's a fresh shot.
That's the where it comes in at a higher level.
Comes in at a higher level, either at the top or sort of halfway down the wheel.
Well, you was vindicated. Strip that back a little bit, you said. I want to see
I
that.
did.
You
I
said
did.
it was critical.
I did, and it is.
This wall's the same height as the wall to the side, which means that Mike's original thought was wrong. This isn't an undershot wheel like this. It's a breast shot one, like this. a much more efficient system. Off to one side of the wheel pit, we've come across a large piece of stone. Phil and I have a look at it.
Well, where should the middle be?
Well, in there somewhere.
We're practically up to the cameraman's waist in debris. It is curving. It's definitely curving all the way around, isn't it?
But there's no hole in the middle. Ah.
What's that? Is that something in the middle?
A hole.
A hole in the middle.
What is round in a mill with a hole in the middle?
A polo. Oh, you mean this whole thing is the hole? So it's been blocked up?
Wow. I mean, that's hollow.
It's a puzzle, isn't it, Mike?
It's I wonder if we should be taking the machine to clear the top off here so we can get a really good look, Phil.
I think you're actually probably right.
Right, to be continued. In the domestic part of the building, we've been looking for household items that might give us some dates. And sure enough, we've got a collection of them.
So this is the stuff from this trench here.
Right.
And really, we want your opinion on the dates, John, if you can.
This, for instance, Staffordshire pottery of the early 19th century, or these white earthenwares.
Right.
There's another example there.
So that's all going with the life of the mill in the 19th century,
and
basically.
this is very probably from Bridgewater, these red earthenware tiles, you know, from your Somerset days.
Yeah.
So we've got a little pile of things developing here. These run right through the 18th century, could well be earlier than that. But as we get down this end of the tray, there are earlier things. This is trailed slipware of the first half of the 18th century. And this last piece I ended up with it. Now, that is a cut edge, isn't it?
It's a bit of modern glass, though, isn't it?
It's not. That actually is early window glass. And this is from a diamond pane, 17th, probably beginning of the 18th century, but it's actually earlier than it looks.
Right. What about that piece? That piece came from much lower down in that,
Yeah,
trench there.
that's good, because this is earlier. Lead-glazed earthenwares of the late 16th and early 17th century. And the typical thing about them is they look dull. At this sort of period, most of the pottery is unornamented.
But it's back as far as 1600, so that at least there's indications that we might have stuff on the site back as far as that.
That's right. Yeah, that's good.
Great. The finds are also taking us back to the 1600s, just like the date of the Leet. But the earliest mention of a mill at Dotton was in here, in the Domesday Book. It's an invaluable record of England in 1086. It lists all the land and livestock and was drawn up to enable William the Conqueror to collect his dues in the form of taxes. What does it say, though, about Dotton?
It tells us that the area paid tax for 1 vergate of land and 3 furlongs.
I'm not even going to ask you what a vergate is. Let's move on.
It's just a very small area.
OK.
Very small area. And there was land for 2 ploughs with 1.5 ploughs there.
How can you have half a plough?
They quite possibly were using half a plough of somebody else's, so borrowing a plough, and therefore it added up to half a plough.
And a slave?
And a slave.
Yeah.
But also there was the mill, which paid 5 shillings.
Tax.
That's right. And the whole area was actually valued at 7 shillings.
You've got Dotton Mill here, which is worth 5 bob, and then you've got all this land round here, and that's only worth another 2 bob.
Yes, so the mill is actually the most valuable bit of this land unit.
Phil now has his millstone. And it's a beauty. But can Martin date it?
It looks to me as though there might be 3 or 4 grooves coming off of the central hole
here?
there. Down here.
One there?
Can we clean it up a bit and just have a look? Or am I making this up? I think we have.
That would be good.
I think we have.
What's that slot there?
Yeah, I think we have. I think there's another one there.
Oh, there? Yes.
So you've got 4 horns.
That's right.
Coming off it, which have been filled in.
Oh,
That's
that would be brilliant.
Yes, there they
So
are.
it is a top stone, and the curving shape of those. Oh, that's excellent, Phil. The curving shape of those certainly pushes the date of this back. I mean, this is 17th, 18th century millstone, I would say.
That fits in with some of the pottery we've been looking at, surely.
Oh, lad, look at that. Isn't that a strange shape?
The key is this bit in the middle. The shape of this dates the stone as 17th century. The dates are all beginning to tie together. We now have the floor of the domestic part of the mill building. It too is a beauty. This was probably the kitchen floor. We decide to lift a section of it to see if we can see signs of any earlier flooring. Across the road in the other field, Helen and Bridge are drawing a blank. They've found the continuation of the leat. This wall is one edge of it. But there's no sign of a wheel pit, and the building doesn't seem to be attached to the leat. It's not looking like an earlier mill, and dating is a problem.
It's either before, during or after, but we don't know which yet.
Yesterday you had the devil's own job getting anywhere near this wall, didn't you? But now you've cleaned it up and it's looking great.
I'm really glad I did too. I mean, when I got here, the first thing I noticed was that these bricks here are actually frogged, and I was a bit despondent about it because they're exactly the same date and age as that wall on the other side. But then as I went down, I realised that it actually zigzags its way down in a sort of V-shape, and it kind of wiggles its way up round through here and then levels off across there. And I realised it was just one big botched repair job, and that underneath all this is good stone masonry. And that stone built work, I think, is the earliest stuff, and in fact it goes behind, and therefore it's got to be earlier than that brickwork there.
What do you reckon, Martin?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Phil. I think this is where the water and the action of the water wheel has eroded the wall, the stone of the wall, and it's been patched with brickwork.
So what do you think about that older bit? What kind of date?
Well, from the other evidence we've had, I guess 17th, 18th century.
Well, that's great. That takes the story of the mill back about 350 years, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but I think we've got the possibility of taking it back even more than that.
How?
Well, if we can have a look underneath the floor of this wheel pit, there may be some evidence under there of earlier structures, because this leat and this watercourse has been in use for a long time.
You see, down here, I've already had a bit of a poke round. This hole here has actually been made by the wheel, and look, you can actually see, look. Oh, wow. Oh, it's a big piece of wood.
That is interesting, isn't it?
Didn't expect that.
Well, that gives them something to chase tomorrow, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
It's day 3 in our search for an early mill in Otterton in Devon. At the end of yesterday, Phil found an intriguing piece of wood.
Oh, wow.
That is interesting, isn't it?
Didn't expect that.
But what is this?
This is a piece of the water wheel. It's the rim.
How do you know that?
Well, look, you've got a really nice curve there, and we've got a lump of wood here, which I think is part of the base of the paddle.
And what are these lumpy bits?
Well, we've got bits of pins for holding the paddles in place.
But do you know that the water wheel would have looked like that?
I do, because we've got this really nice late 19th century photograph.
That's cheating.
Which shows us the rim of the water wheel.
So this actually is part of that?
That wheel is a fragment there.
Late 19th century?
Late 19th century, judging by the guy with the flat cap.
Late 19th century doesn't sound much, really, but actually it's 150 years ago, virtually, isn't it? In his trench, Phil started digging. But there's a problem. There's more wood, but there also seems to be concrete.
Oh, what the hell? This is confusion, Mike. Because there's actually a piece of timber. This timber is coming right in underneath there.
Underneath the concrete?
Underneath the concrete. And yet it's occupying this trough in the concrete, and it looks for all the world as though I've got concrete. I'm not sure whether I haven't got concrete right the way down there.
Could it be stone at the bottom, Phil, rather than concrete? An earlier lining of the wheel pit?
Well, it might be.
Because if you've got wood underneath the concrete, that might mean we've got an earlier structure to the wheel pit.
Yeah, but then you see, if this concrete is laid directly on it, it might actually be stuck onto it. Well, I reckon that concrete's going to have to come up one way or the other.
At the other end of the mill building, we've already gone through the floor of the domestic area, but there's nothing datable and no other features. This trench did give us some internal walls. We begin to plot them out to see if we can understand how this building worked on the inside. The last mill on this site was knocked down only 30 years ago, so there are quite a few people still around who remember it. They saw it at work.
I can remember it, you know, the old mill with the flour. All the farmers, the tenant farmers, brought their corn there.
Reg can remember the mill working.
Yeah, when I worked on the farm up there, the farmer used to have to grind the mill during the war for the farmers.
I remember coming over to the mill with my grandfather in his pony and trap and bringing corn and fetching flour and stuff like that.
What was the miller like?
Well, he was a little short chap, and he was always covered in white flour.
He really was a dusty miller?
Yeah, yeah, he was.
You've done your family research, right?
That's right.
And this lady's family worked in the mill in the 1840s.
My great-great-great-grandfather, he was miller here for 50 years. His name was Joel Roger Carter. This is his daughter, his middle daughter, Anna, and she's my great-great-grandmother. She was born at Otterton Mill. Joel Carter, the miller, he was quite a musician. He played cornet, that he used to go up on the hills above the mill to play, and they could hear the music all across the valley.
For a couple of days, Stuart's been looking at likely places for other mills across the whole site. It's becoming increasingly clear that there's only really one place the mill could have been.
What you need to be able to do is manage the flow of water very, very carefully. And what they've done here at Otterton is to manage the river in a very specific way by building a weir across the river here, which then allows the water to flow down a leat in a ditch. They dig a ditch down here, the water flows down it, turns the mill wheel, and then the water just flows back into the river down here. And one thing to point out is the road, which I think has got forgotten in all the search that we've got.
When you say the road, that's our little country lane.
That's it. It's absolutely critical to the sighting.
Yeah.
It's the only crossing of this valley in the parish. What you need with a mill is not only the water to turn the wheel, but you also need to deliver the corn to grind, and you need to take the flour away. So the conditions are absolutely perfect for the mill just at that point.
So does that mean that where Otterton Mill is now is the prime site for a mill and no one would have built one anywhere else?
I think that's exactly the case. I firmly believe that under the mill that Phil's digging will be evidence of the earliest mill on the site. It's in exactly the position it ought to be efficient.
In the field across the lane, Helen's search for an earlier mill has come to an end. She was looking for signs of a wheel pit, but there isn't one. She's now found most of the leat running from Phil's trench across the field she's been working in. But there's no sign of any building that might be a mill, and no sign of any structure other than what was probably a house.
We've opened 2 holes in it, looking for an earlier mill on this site, and I think what we have shown is that we haven't found a mill, and there's no need for a mill in this field. Everything connected with the leat is going over to that one.
Well, that's really important, isn't it? Because up until now we've had circumstantial evidence that there's only been one site for a mill here because that's the best site that there could possibly be. Now the archaeology is confirming it.
Absolutely, it certainly is here. Yes, this is all leat connected with that mill.
In fact, the leat turns out to be the key to dating the site of the earliest mill. Analysing the various maps, we realise that the key map is that of the parish. This is the parish boundary. On this side, the parish boundary is the leat. As the leat's man-made and doesn't follow any natural feature, this means that the leat must have been here when the parish boundary was laid out. And that pushes it and the mill right into the 10th or 11th century, before Domesday. Back at the main site, just off to the side of where Phil's digging, we've found a second millstone. But the quality of this stone's very poor.
It's such rubbish stone, isn't it?
Well, it is.
When you think we're in a county with Dartmoor granite, with ports that you can bring stone in from the French basin, Forest of Dean's not far away, what are they doing using rubbish like that?
It's a new red sandstone sort of conglomerate type.
Yeah.
And it's very unusual. In fact, it's the first one I've ever seen in Devon.
But they would have had grit in their grain, wouldn't they, if they'd have used that?
Well, they would, but I suspect it was used, at least latterly, for grinding animal feed with.
Ah, right.
So it wouldn't have mattered quite so much, or maybe coarse grinding of some sort. But I think the other thing is it tells us a bit more of the story that this wasn't a particularly prosperous mill latterly, that they weren't buying good quality millstones in.
So that's in great contrast to the 5 shilling at Domesday, which was a lot of money.
Well, it is indeed, isn't it? Yes, it shows how, over a period of 1,000 years, the life of a mill can change enormously.
Yeah.
Yes.
Phil's trying to analyse what's going on with the layers he's finding in his trench. He's not quite there yet.
I was beginning to think that we maybe had sequences of gravel with bits of wood stratified within them, because this timber here overlies this gravel, but this gravel here overlies this big piece of timber in there.
Yeah.
And I began to wonder whether or not we might just have a sort of sequence of layers and deposits with timber, and then the timber rots away and more gravel comes in and they replace it and the whole thing gradually builds up.
Yeah.
But I think all we can say at the moment is that certainly in this gravel there are archaeological deposits. At the moment looks like they're only sort of Victorian, 18th, 19th century, but I think mainly there is the potential for earlier stuff further on down. I think we just got to go for it and see whether we can find something.
Yeah, I agree.
We have the wheel pit, but we also have this other pit called the pit wheel. This held the gearing to turn the millstones. We do have rather a deep hole where the pit should be.
Stone of crows.
If this is the pit wheel, then it is going to be a deep slot, almost as well. It has to be almost as deep as the water wheel.
That is a hell of a hole down there, isn't it? God, Hey!
And there's also this big metal lump here.
It do, done it. I mean, do you want to see if we can get this out?
I think we should go for it, yeah.
Well, it looks like the pit wheel, or part of the pit wheel.
Well, what's this bit?
This is the rim of the gear,
right,
where the wooden cogs were mortised in. This would be the working face. Have it upright.
So vertical, Martin.
Yes. Yes, vertical gear, and these mortises are for the wooden cogs that were in the face of the gear to mesh with the rest of the gearing in the mill.
So why are you using wooden cogs?
Well, this was a fairly large diameter gear, and in the early days they couldn't cast to good tolerances, and 2 cast iron gears running together would have been very noisy and put a lot of stress on each other. So the larger gears were often made with mortises cast in them to put wooden cogs in, which were all paired and prepared by hand, and it made for much quieter and safer running.
The cog in the centre is the piece of gear we've now found. This linked the water wheel to the millstones. It was a key part of the mill equipment. We've now plotted the internal walls of the building and have a good idea of how the inside of the last mill building on the site worked. It's a lovely looking mill you got.
It's terrific, isn't it? We've got this wonderful exterior water wheel, and all the power that's going on there is coming into this end of the mill. Well, we've got all the mill machinery with up there on the first floor, the millstones grinding away. And then over there, at that end, we've got the domestic building.
Can I have a look inside?
Why don't we? Go on then. So big wall over there, Tony, that's our gable end wall, behind which we've got our water wheel, and then this half wheel you can see in front of it, that's our pit wheel. That's bringing all the power in to this machinery here, up into the big wallower wheel in the ceiling. And above us we've got the grinding stones. The millstones working away, that's the noise we can hear. And then small window, storage beneath it, and big window, lots of panes, and the miller's desk beneath that. That's where he keeps all the records, you know, make sure everybody pays the right tithe, the right time of year. And it's actually sitting on a millstone in the floor.
Oh, nice warm in here.
Yeah, it's a lot better, isn't it, Tony? That's because this is the heart of the house. So we've got over there. We've got the table, dining table with the bench in front of it, and we've got the big dresser there with all the sort of pewter and earthenware cups and bowls and stuff. But the real heart of the room and the house is the range over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, big copper kettle, water boiling all the time, and then above it we've got pots and pans and all sorts of stuff. And this is the heart of the house.
It's really cosy, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
The last building on this site seems to have been put up in the 18th century. Our earlier walls and the millstones date from the late 17th century. But the finds take us further back to the early 1600s. The wheel pit has early bricks and even earlier stone at the base. And right at the end of day 3, Phil's come up with the goods once again.
You know this piece of timber that starts there?
Yeah.
Well, I managed to trace it along, and actually, I've got it still going right through to there. In other words, it's going underneath the wall. So that piece of timber has either got to be earlier than that wall, or at the very least the same date.
As a foundation timber.
Exactly.
Yes.
The timber in this trench suggests a much earlier phase for the wheel pit than we'd thought.
Everything says 17th century, but I also think that we've probably got stuff earlier, because the bottom of that leat is incredibly well worn, it's incredibly full of gravel, and right down there, I mean, we've got timber in that goes underneath the floor. I think we're looking at a medieval material, unquestionably.
But I think you see the topographical situation of the place argues that it's earlier even than the structural stuff, because this mill leat that runs right the way through is the parish boundary. That's likely to have been fixed in the 10th or 11th century. Dotton's on this side of that. There's a very limited area, perhaps about 50 metres on the side of it you could put a mill. We've tested it with 3 or 4 trenches. This is the most likely place for that. So, you know, it's not just that it's 400 years old, 500 years old, it's likely to have been here for 1,000 years.
When this building was demolished in the 1960s, it wasn't just the end for a building that was a couple of 100 years old. It was the end of almost 1,000 years of milling on this very spot.